Okay, listeners, I don't even know how to start this episode because I don't even know how this episode of Loki ended. And it's going to be an interesting discussion today because we are shell shocked over here at Sisters Assembled and we're just trying to figure it out like you guys. So we're starting out a little differently today because everybody may or may not have just died. We'll get into it. But Katie, on that note, kick us off.
Dude, I don't think I can do it any better because I have genuine whiplash and shock just running through me from that episode. And honestly, the first thing that came to my head was this could have been a really mean end of season.
Right?
Like if I didn't think there were two more, or if I didn't know there were two more episodes to the show or to the season, this could have been such a mean way to end it.
I totally agree. And the only thing that kept me from having a full-on meltdown when I finished this at 1 o'clock in the morning was the fact that I knew that they were going to have 2 more episodes. But then the question became, well, what are they going to do for 2 episodes? Like, is everyone dead? And we'll get into this, obviously, but is everyone dead? What does this mean? Now we're definitely affecting the wider MCU. We can't ignore it anymore. So I know you've been trying all season, but episode 4 said, nah, Kate, we're done.
I think the reason, and we talked about this from the jump when we said it, the reason we were trying to avoid it quite clearly for both of us was just because it's so heavy. There's so much going on already in the Loki part of the universe, let alone trying to understand how it plays into everything right now is just so chaotic. And there's just simply not enough time. And I think I said that even last episode. There is not enough time to be able to cover everything plus the MCU ramifications. But as soon as that loom exploded, I was like, oh, crap.
This episode was really dark.
Yeah.
I just want to dive into that first. I know obviously the big thing is the last few minutes, and we are going to spend the majority of the episode on that for sure. But I don't want to skip on this heaviness that really came through in this episode. And I remember thinking it even in the middle when Renslayer kills Dox and her whole crew brutally.
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God, like Loki the show is going for it. And then we watched Victor Timely turn into Noodles. So we were right that he's not the big bad. And then, everybody exploded. And it was just, I think that the darkness of the episode itself was kind of in its own way preparing us for that last scene or two. But I don't think that in any way I knew that was coming, right? Like, I think you almost have this intuition that things are changing and tone is changing. And that much I picked up on, but never in a million years did I think we were going to literally blow up the timeline.
Yeah, honestly, Marvel saw that they were releasing close to Halloween and they said, this episode needs to be loaded. And that is what they did. Because first off, you listed all the big moments, but let's just go through those big dark moments for just one by one. Renslayer committed mass murder in about 30 seconds, roughly. And that was dark.
And Brad.
Oh, do not. I said from the get-go, you don't trust someone named Brad.
It's true.
I knew this man was coming. He already did Dox dirty. And not that, I'm pro-Dox. Obviously, we weren't. She was, the other side of the TVA that we didn't agree with, that we wanted to, prune everyone. But he already had no problems flipping on her. So I wasn't shocked that he was going to be like a turncoat pretty much because he already kind of was. But the fact that he stood there and watched 20 other fellow TVA people literally get squished to death was shocking. And did you catch Miss Minute's face?
No! Yeah, I could not wait to talk to you about it. And then not only does she have this smile on her face, but
she looks giddy.
Okay, not just that, but they literally close up. They were like, forget Ravonna. Let's do a close up on this incredibly happy AI who is thrilled to be killing people right now.
Dude, I said before she was unhinged. She's a different level of unhinged. Like, holy crap.
I saw something the other day that was saying that Ms. Minutes is Ultron's true, successor. And I was like, That's actually such an interesting take. I don't remember who said it, but I thought it was amazing. And she really is. Like, she doesn't have the hatred of humanity, but she just has the same kind of one single minded focus where she is absolutely sure she wants to get back at Victor Timely.
Dude, just think about all I can think about now is Ultron Vision from What If, right? And how all of us, as soon as he turned around and goes, "Who said that?" We all were like,
Yeah.
what do you mean? Who said that? Why is he looking into my soul right now as I'm sitting on the couch?" But that is what I felt there. Just like, I mean, if this is not Marvel saying AI is a problem, I don't know what else could be more clear. But holy crap. I didn't think they'd zoom in on her, but I was watching her from the background
Yeah.
and I was like, whoa, I am very, very, very uncomfortable right now.
Yeah. No, she was enjoying that way too much. And then they wanted us to see it because they did zoom in and they were like, take notice, villain in the making.
Well, and then, not that I want to jump around too much, but it's very hard in this episode. There was a lot going on. But then when she was getting shut down and she had that really, it was, I swear this episode was like borderline horror because she sat there and literally was like, "You'll never be him."
I know.
Deadpan.
I know.
And then died. I was like, okay, that's fine.
I live alone, folks. Sometimes when I watch certain things, thank you, The Last of Us, it's the one time where I'm like, ooh, I wish I didn't live alone. This was a little scary. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, it really was borderline horror. And not like, oh, spooky psycho killer slasher film, but there were some psychological parts to it. There were just dark parts that you were like, whoa, this is a different direction. And we've seen some of it before. I would say MOM had obviously those moments too, but it was just dark and not in a way that I thought we were going to go in Loki of all things, let alone in the middle of the series. Like, we didn't start out here. We have worked our way here.
Yeah, it was very shocking, I think. I wasn't expecting to go there. I think it's the show's been so fun. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's been some dark elements for sure. I mean, Loki torturing Brad, it kind of showed that the show
The
was
branch bombings.
yeah, I mean, all of those things were really, pretty awful. And so I think it kind of showed that the show was taking a different tone in season 2, but I don't think I thought it was going to take it this far. And there's definitely a lot further along the road to pure sadness and darkness than I thought, and then going into that next item on the list that I mentioned, Victor Timely and his untimely death. Like, what was that?
Okay. The first thing I have to say was there was a sense of relief I had because I was in love with Victor Timely. And I was like, if he becomes a bad guy, I'm actually really going to be upset because he was so cute, even in this episode.
I'm so glad you said that because as shocked as I was that he just like noodled, I also was kind of like, at least he noodled and we don't have to watch him become he who remains. I wasn't sure. I mean, we talked about this last episode. I wasn't sure that that was the road he was going to go on because to your point, he was really fun, really likable. He seemed like he genuinely wanted to help and do the right thing. And I wasn't really seeing hints that he was even turning.
No, but I just didn't. I think the other thing was I just didn't want to prove Sylvie right about him.
That too.
And so I just was like, please, 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 please do not become him.
Yeah.
Do not go this way. And I won't lie, I was a little nervous when he was the one who volunteered to go out there. I was like, what if? What if this loom or the other thing in the middle whose name is escaping me just senses him and there's just something about his temporal aura that it knows it's he who remains, but like it's really not, and just something. What if? That was going through my head when he volunteered to go out there. And then, I didn't expect him to be pretty much obliterated the second he went out there. There were a lot of shocking moments. That was one of them in which my jaw genuinely dropped. And I was like, what just happened?
Yeah. I really was like, oh, so that's how we're getting rid of Victor Timely. Like, all right, you just literally obliterated him. And then I kept thinking, and obviously we knew Loki wasn't. Actually, that's a dumb thing to say. I was going to say, obviously we knew Loki wasn't going to die. And then, 3 minutes down the show happened. But we'll get to that in a minute. But I didn't think it was Loki would die in that way necessarily. But I couldn't help but think Mobius just kept pushing him to go, right? He was like, oh, it's your turn to go out there. Can you imagine if they had killed Loki by, I'm calling it noodling, by noodling him like that? They made him spaghetti after his death at the hands of Thanos. Can you imagine if they had made Loki spaghetti?
Well, honestly, and I don't want to deviate too far, but that scene with him and Mobius, had me cackling.
Oh my god, they were so funny.
Well, and it was so interesting though, because you sit there and not even 10 minutes later, Renslayer's out here committing mass murder. So it was a very up and down episode because you have, some serious conversations happening between Loki and Sylvie. Sylvie and Mobius exchange a couple words with each other. Then you have Mobius and Loki out here arguing like a married couple essentially because he's like, it's your turn to go. Well, or my favorite was, see, that looks like you. It doesn't look like me. Yes, it does look like you. And Sophie's like, it literally has a helmet on. It doesn't look like anybody. Like, it's a little prototype dude. Like, it was so hilarious. And then we have these dark, dark moments. I mean, we have Renslayer get pruned.
Oh, yeah.
Which, thank God, she was so freaking annoying.
I know. I actually, in all of the craziness, I forgot about that.
No, I was so happy about it. So that's why I couldn't forget it because I genuinely rejoiced because especially how she acted when she prior to killing Docs and then, she did that. I just was like, girl, stop. Like, you're just annoying. That genuinely, as I was writing notes this episode, it's so hard sometimes because I write emotions and then I read them later and I'm like, I don't really know what I meant by this. Because I'll just be like, yo, what is happening? And I'm like, I don't know either. Now that I'm past this, I don't know what we're talking about. Yeah, but I even was writing like, I cannot stand her.
Yeah.
She is so annoying in this scene. And then obviously she does what she does. So especially having Brad mind like enchanted and he's the one who goes and prunes her, I was like, that is so satisfying. You have no idea.
Well, and honestly, like, not to give Brad any benefit of the doubt because he let his people die. Like, that was his team, right? And he was just like, well, I do like the sacred timeline. But I will say he obviously had some qualms about it, right? Like, he didn't just gleefully go over. And so I think in some ways, and we don't see Brad after that, right?
Not after we see that her spell drops from him, but I'm not sure we see him past that because then we go to the team that are trying to fix the loom.
Right. So my whole point in saying that is I almost feel like when that spell drops, there's almost like relief for Brad, right? Because now he's not being essentially controlled by this woman and forced to do these horrible things or stand by while these horrible things are happening. Again, I'm not justifying. He could have said, hey, what you're doing is wrong, or stopped her, or whatever. But I think I'll say there's probably a part of him that is still a decent human being. And that part of him, I think, is probably relieved that he was the one who took her out.
Yeah, I don't think he wanted to follow her, but I think she was a means to an end.
I agree.
Because, for one, we saw what happened to Dox and her team. If he would have stood with them, he would also be dead. But he also was being promised the ability to go back to the life he wanted on the sacred timeline. And so I don't think he wanted to go with her any more than he wanted to go with anybody else. I just think simply she was willing to give him what he wanted, and she was in a position of power to him rather than, Dox and everybody else were in the same place as he was. They were sitting there, looked like they had really given up. He tried to give them pep talks to get them maybe moving, trying to do something, and they all were like, no, man, we're done. This is it. We've done what we've had to do. And so I just think he quite frankly went after Renslayer, or went with Renslayer, because he was like, not knowing that he was going to die if he didn't. Well, kind of, because she did threaten that. But I just think he went after her because he wanted to get to his life. And that was the only way he was going to do it. He wasn't going to do it in that room.
Yeah, I agree. I also think it's worth noting, Docs seemed to be having a change of heart.
Yeah.
And so I think, it is disappointing to see someone willing to evolve and change their perspective based on new information and things like that, and then be immediately murdered for it is a bummer. It also, though, directly refutes Sylvie's whole thesis that the TVA can't change, because here you go, having a major general, a leader of the TVA, who, when presented with all of the facts, is truly able to repent. I don't want to say repent for what she did, but see the other side and realize, no, we need to protect this institution in its current form, even if it's just because she loves the TVA. I think she was able to see that the TVA is changing, so if she wants to be in it and be a part of it, she needs to change with it. Does she necessarily believe in the new mission? Debatable. But, if she's willing to protect it, great. and then not even a few minutes later, she's murdered for it. So that was interesting too.
And I think how they went about it was pretty interesting because they went about it using the relationships they have. I think from the get go, you see these two different sides take place, and you're like, okay, here's one version and here's the other. One is okay with all the branches, one isn't. They want to chop them. Cool. You see it, but I think that almost takes you out of remembering that these people were coworkers for how many years. They don't even know. They aren't even aware because they don't know how many years are passing. But these people have worked side by side. And so I think talking it out with B15, I mean, that is something Docs even says to Renslayer. Like, I don't know how she said it, but she brings up B15 and she was like, she's got integrity. And, I know her. And that is part of what changed it. Renslayer wasn't going to change their mind because they all watched what she did.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what she doesn't get. And that's why, again, I was so happy she was pruned because I was like, you are so ridiculously on my nerves. It is not even funny. But she like comes in there expecting all these people to follow her as if they weren't betrayed by her.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's in the same way that Ms. Minutes is single-minded, so is Renslayer. And she doesn't see the humanity behind anyone or show empathy of any kind. Whereas that's what our team, I think it's actually their strength, is their empathy. And even Sylvie not killing Victor Timely last episode. So important because, even though it blew up anyway, they got closer to fixing it because he was alive. You know, there's one more thing I want to talk about before we jump into that last scene, which is going to take, I think, the rest of the episode.
Oy.
But I want to talk about something that Loki said in his conversation with Sylvie because I thought it was interesting when he was talking about Thor's time on Earth.
Oh, I have this in my notes.
And he said, a few years ago, my brother went to Earth. And I was like, but hold on, you just invaded New York in 2012. That was last year. What year is he think it is? Because then she says something about there's no time here. That's right. You guys don't know. Time doesn't exist here or something.
Yeah.
And I was like, woo, we are getting more clues. More clues.
This is verbatim what I wrote. In all caps, it was another Thor reference. Because have we not been talking about how much we have been referencing his life prior to being in the TVA? This is yet again another one. But then I wrote, not in all caps, but I wrote, but why is he saying some years ago? Because for this Loki, shouldn't it have been pretty close, or shouldn't these have been pretty close to each other?
Yeah.
Because it should have been. And I'm glad you picked that up too, because I was sitting here and I was like, this timing is not making sense. Why is he saying some years ago? And then my brain was I was racking my brain, right? And I was like, okay, maybe some more time passed between the first Thor and Avengers more than I'm thinking. But even then, I'm like, if anything, it was maybe, if I could justify it, maybe 2 years. The way he said that, and it wasn't. I know it wasn't.
Because remember, up until Endgame, we were following, like, our calendar year matched there. It's not until that 5-year jump that we got messed up.
Well, right. And that's why I was like, okay, maybe I could justify there was more time passing than I had thought. Because if you think about it, and this is going to get real nitty gritty for a second, but if you think about it, say Thor happened in January of, I'm just going to say 2023, and Avengers happened in November of 2024. That is an almost 2-year difference, even if they're back-to-back years. Obviously, I know this is nitty gritty. This is like so in the weeds, but that is where my brain was going because I was like, this doesn't make sense to what we saw and what we know.
Well, and I couldn't help but think, did they make a mistake? But then I was like, I think about all the, like, the flack that they got for the mathematical error that they made in Homecoming. And I was like, there's no way in a show about time travel that they are making this mistake. Every word, especially when they're talking about how events relate to one another, needs to be intentional and should be, and I think should be taken that way. So where does Loki think? The other thing to think about is that just Loki's perception of time or a hint at where we actually are in time? Because it could be to Loki that it feels like another year has passed. Maybe to him it feels like 2013. So that would be some years ago, right? When his brother went to Earth or was banished off Asgard, same deal. But I'm confused, because it could be too that, like, are we in the present day? Because if the timeline blows up, Like, if the timeline blew up in 2013, nothing would have happened after. So we have to be in present day. So does Loki know that we're in present day and that it's actually 2023?
Well, this brings us to that debate we've been having since prior to Loki, because we actually opened the debate during Doctor Strange replay, because we were like, hold on, because if this was meant this, with the whole multiverse being open maybe earlier than it was, and we were like, well, here's the pros, here's the cons, and that was us thinking, where does Loki actually fall? Because the implications have to be affecting it. So could it be happening earlier? Could it be happening with us? That was the whole conversation. I think that's exactly what this line brings us right back to is now what? Because there's no way what just happened isn't going to affect, like, you can't tell me this happened in 2016 and all of Civil War happened and all of the invasion with Thanos and then the 5 years passed and then the second invasion of Thanos. You can't tell me that all happened, but the entire Sacred Timeline was a mess. And wait, not to mention, in the very first season of Loki, and granted, time is circular, whatever, but Renslayer even says that the Avengers were supposed to go back in time. So then you have that whole weird part. So I don't know. This was a lot in one little line.
It is a very loaded line, and it also segs perfectly into the end of the episode because the whole end of the episode, we're going to throw out theories. Kate and I have been texting all day about them, but I think the first problem we have to at least try to think of ideas about is exactly what you just brought up. Is this present day? There's no way, there's no timeline anymore. I just want to reiterate that. It all blew up. The whole multiverse, I think, has ceased to exist in the form that we knew it in. I'll say that because Katie's face looks a little skeptical, and I don't want to go all disaster on all of us. But I do think that in the form that we have come to know the multiverse in the few short years we've had it, that no longer, I just don't know how that exists anymore. And with that being said, there is no way, I understand, like you said, time is circular, but there is absolutely no way that everything that we've seen could have happened if there was no timeline on which for it to happen. Unless, and I'm going to get really technical with you all here, we are following the sacred circle as viewers of these films in one turn of it, right? We're assuming that it just keeps going around and starting over and around and starting over. We talked about in the Quantumania, right? Like, what is the starting over point? I still don't know whether or not that theory is right, but we haven't been proved wrong, so I'm going to keep going with it.
True.
If we are just on one viewing of the circle and we have not yet reached the end.
But if we just blew up the circle, maybe.
But what I'm saying is then what we have already seen, it doesn't matter. Like that can blow up and it doesn't affect anything that we've already seen because already technically happened for us viewers, right? And now everything moving forward is nothing.
Okay, so I'm either going to say this and it's going to reiterate what you just said in different words, or it's going to be a different thought.
I'm excited to find out which one it is.
Yeah, I don't really know if I followed or if I don't know. But what my thought process is, and again, could be exactly what you just said, might not be. But I'm thinking, and this is all tying, my brain is so devoted to thinking Loki's going to make it back to see his brother. So this is solely what this is going off of. But I'm thinking, okay, we had the sacred circle. Cool. But now because we opened the branch, which, well, I guess I don't really understand that. Before we get into this, how do we have a circle if they're still creating it? Because that's the whole point of the loom, right? It was always he who remains tying together the sacred timeline?
Yes, you're right. And it's a good question. I'm going to throw out my theory for it. Not a physicist, so take it with a grain of salt. But
Go off.
He's always talked about the end of time. He knows that there is an end. There is a place where it just doesn't continue on.
Right.
That to me is the point where the circle both begins and ends. So if you're looking at a circle, I think it's just like a half-formed, three-quarter formed circle, and it will like go again, but it just has to complete first. And we've not yet reached a point, and now we may never reach a point where it's actually completed, but that's what the loom was doing, was building the circle out to complete it. That's my best guess.
Yeah, no, I'll take that. I was thinking about that and it didn't seem right to me for a second, but okay. So what I was thinking with what happened here was we had the sacred timeline. Cool. Then the loom exploded. Not so cool. And my thought is it's all gone.
Yeah.
In the sense of, I don't think the sacred timeline just died. Like, I don't think that's gone. I just think the connection, them being woven together, that's all gone. So I think at the end of the day, I mean, there will be effects on our timeline. If we don't see them, I'm going to be kind of annoyed. Like, you don't blow up the loom that is supposedly putting together the entire timeline in one property, and then you're like, we're never gonna mention this again.
This is the universe that had an entire celestial half emerge out of our planet and only reference it once in a clickbait article. So, as much as I want to agree with
I know,
you,
but it's the multiverse saga. That's the other thing. It's not the celestial saga. It's not the space saga. It's not the whatever. It's the multiverse saga. So to me, I'm sitting there and I'm like, you can't do this and then pretend it didn't happen.
oh, I agree that it would be dumb. I'm just saying they've done dumb things before.
Right. But that was like one property.
Right.
But my one thing that I'm trying to understand is that's what I'm thinking. That the multiverse itself didn't blow up, it didn't implode, nothing happened there. It's just the fact that all the timelines are now probably untangled. They're all separate now because they're no longer being fed into the loop. So they're all just being shot off and doing random crap. That is what I'm thinking. That way, the sacred timeline is still doing its own thing, but all these other timelines are doing its own thing too now. And they're not being put together into one timeline. So that to me reads like anything could happen because there's no correct timeline anymore.
I have a few thoughts to that, what you just said. First, the actual premise of the idea itself, I get it. I kind of like it. The idea that they're no longer just branches, it's more that now they're their own fully formed timeline. I like that. I can get behind it. The second thing I want to say is the good thing about this happening, though it's obviously a tragedy, is there will be a clear delineation before this happened and after this happened if they play their cards right in the MCU. So we will now have an understanding of where Loki stands in the timeline because there has to be before the multiverse exploded, after the multiverse exploded, right? So I think we can safely say everything that we've seen up until now has to be before the multiverse exploded because I don't know about you, but I didn't notice anything horrendously out of context within the timeline. Anything that really shouldn't have been there or was out of time. I think that's a safe bet, in my opinion.
The only thing I'm going to say to that, and because we have no precedence, I can throw out any theory here. But I'm thinking when they were branches, they weren't full fledged universes yet, right? That was the whole thing, is that they were growing in to become universes, but they were still branches coming off the sacred timeline. They weren't, because remember, I don't know what episode, but way back when I kind of always said, I always pictured the multiverse as, you know, whatever one we're on, but then they all stacked on top of each other, right? Like they were all their own universes doing their own thing, kind of being parallel to each other, and then, you know, branches or whatever. But if we go off of that thought, maybe this happened before like MOM. And think about, because I'm thinking of the incursion that's happening.
You said the word incursion. I want to throw out my mega theory that I texted you earlier.
Okay.
Because I think it's a showstopper. If you guys have seen Only Murders in the Building, this is my showstopper. What if you want to say the word incursion? I will raise you to the next level. What if we just watch the creation of Battle World? Battle World is the result of multiple incursions, multiple universes coming together to create one world, question mark. And if we just watched, you know, the loom break, what if, as it's almost like the Big Bang, right? Except as these timelines are expanding, as they're growing potentially now separate but into one another, now we have incursion starting, now we have Battle World. What if in one fell swoop we just watched the creation of the world that we will be in for Secret Wars? Because you're not going to have a Secret Wars without Battle World, because that is just not Secret Wars.
So I am not angry about it. And I wasn't angry when you texted it to me. But I am going to play devil's advocate because there's a hole and it's called Kang Dynasty.
That dumb movie keeps getting in my way.
I know. But my thought process is, if we run with my theory that now that they're becoming separate, they're all going to be separate universes, that means all Kang variants can be present, right? I mean, I don't understand where the Council of Kangs is hanging out. I'm not going to pretend to explain that. I don't know. I just don't. But that can cause even more Kangs to appear if they're all their own separate universes. because that has to come before Battle World or Secret Wars with Battle World in it. I can't think we had Battle World just formed in front of our eyes. The other thing is, and give or take this one, who knows? But Doctor Strange, MOM, set up the incursion, and they're trying to stop the incursion that is we predicted is going to create Battle World. Fine, that's our prediction, but I only say it to say, where does that end credit go if we already have Battle World?
Okay,
I stumped you on this one.
you did, but I'm trying to answer both things that you said at the same time, so let me, like, reorganize my brain into cohesive and coherent thoughts. The first thing, to play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate about Kang Dynasty, I think it all comes down to that question that we talked about maybe 2 episodes ago as it related to Loki. Is Kang Dynasty a prequel to Secret Wars, and does it set it up? Or is it more of a down the line thing that happens with a little bit more space and there's some things in between? I don't remember exactly where Fantastic Four falls in there, but that's clearly got to be multiversal. There's a reason that we were introduced to an iteration of Reed Richards in a multiversal focused film. So I think that's got to be multiversal. I also, to something that you've said a million times, we're not going to see the origin story for a third time. Every property that they've rebooted for the third time or second time or whatever, however many times it's been, they've avoided that kind of rehashing of the story. So I think that's kind of a complication there. And then the other thing I want to quickly say as it relates to the incursion is, if you're going back to your theory that this happened before MOM, I don't know. I think if I'm remembering correctly, I don't know that Battle World in the comics is formed all at once. So maybe what they're looking at is our universe's incursion, right? Maybe we're seeing a bunch of incursions, yes, as a relation of the loom exploding, but maybe 616 hasn't incurred yet or hasn't crashed yet. But it's not until MOM that we actually see our universe crash, because I'll bring this up again. I think it's important because I love Miles Morales. His universe and our universe are the ones that collide in like the final, before we create Battle World. If you're going to adjust the comics a little bit, 616 maybe is one of the later ones to have the incursion. And now that ties into the end credit scene with Clea and Doctor Strange.
Okay, so to the first one with Kang and Kang Dynasty. The only thing I'm going to say is, and I see your point about one might not lead into the other. It might not be an Infinity War endgame. Cool. And I'm not against that. I will say, though, there's a reason it's going to happen first. And I feel like with all the Kangs out there, logically, it makes the most sense. I mean, because once you hit Battle World, and sorry, we keep saying Battle World, but it's Secret Wars is what we're referring to as the film. But we're going to keep calling it Battle World because that just makes sense to what we're saying. Once you hit Battle World, I do not expect the multiverse to be is the multiverse ever really normal? But I don't expect it to be normal. Versus Kang is a multiversal threat. And I just feel like I can't see Battle World being formed before we have Kang come in and being all angry because he's like, my multiverse, stop. Like, you know what I mean? I just feel like that's a very weird transition to have it already there. Kang comes in, he's like, everybody get out of my multiverse. And then we're like, oh, by the way, remember how we formed Battle World before this whole big battle thing that just happened? Cool. Now we're going back to that. So it just seems like timeline wise, it just doesn't fit. If you gave me Secret Wars before, I wouldn't even think a thing of it. I'd be like, yeah, we probably just had Battle World formed.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think a second thought.
I think the one thing where I'm getting stuck is, one, I just really want it to be Battle World because that would be awesome.
I mean, I like the theory. I just think Kang Dynasty is sticking out like a sore thumb right now.
It is. I think where I'm getting stuck, though, if we're taking that Kang Dynasty is not a prequel or a setup film for Secret Wars, then what else would set up Secret Wars, right? We've talked about the lack of multiversal focused films. And so I think that's tough.
And maybe it does. Maybe it does. I mean, remember, we don't know. So at the end of the day, Kang Dynasty could be the Infinity War.
It could.
It could just as easily, taking out all the Kangs, let's say that's the end of that. That's what they have to do. That's the goal of the movie. They have to destroy all the Kangs. At the end of the day, might be what helps lead to Battle World.
Yeah, very true.
I mean, there are two ways to look at it. I think that's the simple answer. As far as what you were saying before with Doctor Strange and Clea and stuff, I mean, I guess my only thought is, and I think this is what I was trying to say earlier, and I'm not sure I was articulating it, but now I have a better way of saying it. The way my theory is working is because everything was branching off the sacred timeline, there was nothing hitting the sacred timeline, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Because everything was coming off of it. If they were hitting each other, that was one thing, but they weren't inherently hitting 616. Now 616 is up for collision course.
that's fair.
So that's why I have to think, we have to have multiverse or like different universes in the multiverse formed around in order to collide. I don't know, timeline wise, maybe this is happening before MOM, dude.
That makes me very uncomfortable.
Well, just think how we thought maybe season 1 of Loki could have been happening before the first Doctor Strange.
This all makes me very uncomfortable. I just want to say that.
I know.
I don't like not knowing years. It makes everything really, really difficult.
Well, I will say there's been, to me, a lot of emphasis on time moves differently here.
Yeah.
Time's not the same here, like blah, blah, blah. We've had OB mention it's been 400 years since he saw Mobius. Like, we've had a lot more reference to a time frame, to some sort of measure of time, the fact that time is different. We've had so many references in 4 episodes, more than we've had in probably the entirety of season 1. I mean, I think they had the one of, oh, time moves differently in the TVA, and that was probably it.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're heading towards an answer as it relates to where this stands. And I mean, like we started off this kind of segment by saying, this has to affect the larger MCU.
It has to.
Yeah, we're going to have to see how that plays out. I don't know. But future projects, if they are taking place after this happened, they need to be affected, right?
Right.
And so we'll be able to kind of gauge based on that. All right, this one looks normal. That probably happened before Loki, even though it's like coming out after, right? So, like, say we in a couple weeks go see the Marvels and we look at it and we're like, okay, everything seems pretty normal here. Great. That's awesome. This probably took place before Loki. Then, say we get into Echo next year. That's a bad example because it's not going to deal with the multiverse, but I'm going to put it out there because it comes out next. Say Echo, we get in there, and things are just a little off, right? This character is not where they're supposed to be, or a character was unmasked who wasn't supposed to be, or we have a totally different Spider-Man. I don't know. It could happen.
That would be so cool. Oh my God.
That would be amazing.
Like, just Andrew Garfield rips his mask off. I would cry.
It doesn't even have to be Garfield making a cameo.
No, but I would love it.
It would be great. No, but I'm just saying it could be as simple as Spider-Man unmasked and you see a picture of Peter Parker and it's not our Peter Parker.
Yeah.
Just imagine, right? It could be that simple.
Like small things that seem to start going wrong.
Exactly. And now you're like, oh, this is after Loki, and now we're in a totally different universe. That's the question. If this is as big as we think it is, which I think it is, or I wouldn't say it, it's entirely possible that now not only do we have to guess when something is taking place, but in what universe.
Yeah, I think my only thing is, and this could be just me being me, I don't know. So you can tell me if this is a full opinion or an actual thought. But I feel that Marvel has always tried very, very hard to separate their different groups. And we've talked about this a lot. We've got our street level, we've got our cosmic, we've got our magical or slash mystical, we've got, who am I missing?
Space.
So I feel like they won't always rip that Band-Aid off in a Thunderbolts. Maybe an end credit, but not in the Thunderbolts. You know what I mean? I just feel like sometimes they just don't make that choice to mess with both of those.
And that's totally fair, but here's where they have an out is they can just say, oh, this is normal, happened before Loki season 2.
Right, but I'm not disagreeing. I just don't know. I don't know how they're handling the timeline of the MCU at this point.
Yeah, no, it's very much in the air.
Yeah, exactly. So it's very hard for me to sit here and say, oh, it's going to be black and white. If this looks normal, it's before this. But if it doesn't, it's after this. Because Thunderbolts could be super normal and we could end up getting confirmation that, no, it totally happened after this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I just think it's something that we should definitely keep an eye on in future properties because we need to be very eagle-eyed moving forward with a new variable on the table.
Well, I think if they make a really cool choice, which they could do, which they haven't done yet. Anytime they've had a show or a movie overlap, they had the potential to do something pretty cool. And we've talked about, I mean, we talked about this from the get go because the very first project we covered was Loki season 1 and Black Widow.
Yep.
They have the potential to have these two overlap in some way. Like, it would have been really cool if Quantumania happened during Loki.
That would have been the best.
Right. Or like somewhere like that. You know what I mean? If it would have come out, say, a week before Loki or even the first week of Loki, we didn't see Victor Timely till episode 3. That would have given, the real like diehard fans 2-3 weeks, plenty of time to go see it. They saw the end credit. Boom. Victor Timely just showed up on their screens at home a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
They have the potential to do that yet again with Captain Marvel or the Marvels. Sorry. And so, will they do it? Who knows? But it would be pretty cool if we saw maybe something as an end credit or whatever tie into Loki, or see something from Loki tie into the Marvels. I think that could be a really cool way that we start seeing an effect, or even not even an effect, or just, things aren't what they seem.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. And it's actually an especially good opportunity. One, because we know space and multiverse, they have a little bit of tie here and there. Not as much as magic.
Well, and Kamala's got a bangle that lets her travel through time.
Well, I was going to say, and she may or may not be descended from multiversal beings, or, beings from another universe.
Yeah, there's a lot of connection, in my opinion, that can bring us there. So that's why, I mean, Black Widow and Loki were kind of up in the air because they were very different properties. But I do think there's an ability to bring it all together. And granted, I was like, how many? I don't even know the date today. We have one episode of Loki. Well, no. Well, yes, they're kind of coming out the same day, right?
Yeah, technically.
Because we see the movie Thursday.
Yeah, if you watch the Marvels on premiere day, the 10th, then you are watching it on the same day that Loki comes out. Now, if you're a Thursday person, you watch Loki Thursday and you watch the Marvels Thursday, you're watching them literally on the same day.
Yeah.
Kate and I may be doing that. So
I'll probably come home and be watching Loki, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to come home, record an episode, then watch Loki. That's going to be a very, very marvelous evening for us. But there is the opportunity, but then you have to wonder, are they going to do that because they literally are coming out on the same day? Because then people have to worry about what order they watching it in, right? If Loki's coming out Friday, are you assuming that people are watching Loki before you're going to see the Marvels? And then you're going to get messed up if you do the opposite? Who knows?
Well, I will just say, and that's the funky thing with it coming out, Loki technically coming out Thursday nights.
Yeah.
Same with the movies. It's just kind of funky. But because Loki doesn't technically hit till 9, I don't know. I really couldn't tell you. But it could be an interesting thing, just in general. But I digress. I want to bring us all the way back. Answer the real question from this entire episode. And it's, is everybody dead? Is everybody gone?
I'm going to give my answer with how you started the episode by saying, if this was an episode 6, I would be concerned. I don't think I would think that Loki was dead because, again, they killed him before and the fandom may or may not have rioted a tiny bit and then drifted deeply into conspiracy theory territory, many of which we've spouted on this show. But we are not at episode 6. So if everybody's dead, what do you do for 2 more episodes?
Well, and wasn't or season 1, episode 4 when they pruned him? Or was that end of 3? I can't remember.
I actually was going to say, wasn't it?
It wasn't 5.
I think it was the end of 4.
Yeah, I think it was 4 too. So remember how we all thought he was dead and the end credit allowed us not to, but there wasn't an end credit to this one? There was just a black screen of silence?
I scrolled twice to check and I was like, what do you mean there's no end credit?
No, I literally let it play out. I was sitting there watching it play out because I was like, I don't know, I think they're fooling me. I don't think they're right. So I like scrolled to look and I was like, nope, we're letting it play out. I could just be missing it maybe.
I went back twice to make sure.
I mean, it didn't make me feel good when the screen just went black for like 10 seconds and all I thought about was Infinity War. And that never bodes well for Loki. So I got really nervous and scared. And then I was like, maybe something will pop up. And then the credits just started. And that didn't make me feel good. But I will say I agree. I don't think they could have died because, quite frankly, we have 2 episodes left. Like, who is going to be in them?
Correct. But here's the thing. We watched Victor Timely get turned into noodles the second he walked out there. And that wasn't even an explosion. That was just like latent radiation. And like, look, I don't think they can be dead because, like, to your point, what are we going to watch for 2 more episodes? But also, that's a whole lot of radiation. Although, here's a fun theory. What if they all just got blown back onto the sacred timeline?
That's exact I we are thinking the same thing because I thought the same thing. But it wasn't just a sacred timeline. What if they just got blown onto timelines?
But specifically, because I know you want this, what if Loki got blown onto the sacred timeline?
I know. I really do, but I have to theorize the fact that they could have just gotten blown on completely random timelines.
And that's totally possible. They also could be on completely separate timelines. Like,
That's what I mean.
maybe Mobius is finally going to see his life. This is how it does it.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. Like maybe with them all imploding like that, maybe they're getting hit. I don't know if it's because I don't want to get into temporal energy. I don't really pretend to understand it. I just, it is what it is. But maybe they get hit with timelines and they fly right on. Because if there's a reason we had to pull Loki physically out of time in the first episode, and we haven't even gotten to the fact that there's a weird time loop that was happening in the TVA. That was a topic that happened.
Yeah, I was not going to let us finish this episode without talking about it. I want to quickly go back to what you were saying, and then we'll tie right into the time loop because I think it's a perfect little bridge. But you're right. I think it could be interesting and I will take a leap on the temporal energy and the temporal aura.
You go for it, because I can't.
What if you are actually attracted to your own temporal energy? Not in the sense of like Loki and Sylvie being attracted to each other, but like within an explosion like that, you naturally go to where you're supposed to be. I think it kind of ties in nicely with what you were saying about Loki having to be pulled out of time. It kind of shows that like your energy has something to do with where you are on the timeline. And that's why I think Mobius is going to go see his life. I think Loki's going to go back into his life. Like, so many of these people are going to get the chance to go live and be on the sacred timeline because that's the strongest branch right now is the sacred timeline, or it was when it exploded. And now everybody gets to go back because they're drawn by temporal energy to quote unquote their original.
I like it because I want Loki to return. But I also am thinking everything happens for a reason. That I am the biggest person, especially in the MCU, to preach that.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking we had an entire first episode to introduce us to why they had to pull Loki out of the time stream.
Which I still don't really get, but that's fine.
No, I don't either. But we had an entire first episode wrapped around that. I didn't even know a loom existed until we were introduced to the fact that we had to pull Loki out of all the extra branches coming out. Can't explain it, not even going to bother to. But we were taught that. We have an entire series so far talking about how it's not only possible, but they're trying, people like Renslayer, to use it as a way, to use the possibility of going back to your regular life as a bargaining chip. So at the end of the day, there are just too many things happening here for me to confidently say they aren't marrying in the middle. And I like that you're saying, maybe it's the temporal energy or aura. Oh, that's the other thing I was going to say. We were introduced to temporal auras.
Yep.
I didn't know what that was. Didn't know that was a thing until we find out that all variants share a temporal aura. Okay, great to know, because now what? That strengthens to me your theory of being pulled back into where you might be. Although, where could you be? Maybe it's not the OG. Maybe you're being pulled into branches. Who knows?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to say, too, is that whole idea of Victor Timely and He Who Remains having the same temporal aura shows that no matter what version you are, that means Loki and Sylvie technically have the same temporal aura, as much as she will not want to admit that they do.
Right.
And I'm just saying, going back to the sacred timeline, because one, we all want it for Loki, and two, they did not hint at Mobius again in this episode not knowing what his life was without us ever going to see what Mobius's life was. So that's why I think we're going back to the sacred timeline. I also think, based on your theory, up until this moment, the sacred timeline was the strongest branch. It was the one that was most fully formed. Now, if we're going off of your theory, they're all fully formed. However, that's going to have potentially, in my opinion, I'm just going to throw something out there, the most energy attached to it because it's the strongest, is the one that's been allowed to grow the most. So if you're attracted to quote unquote your original or your temporal aura, your temporal aura from the sacred timeline is going to be the strongest and potentially then the most attractive to your other variants. So that could mean, hear me out, Loki and Sylvie are going to end up in the same spot because they're actually the same person. Let's not let anybody forget that. Mobius is going to go back. B-15 is going to go back. They're all going to go back to where they originally were.
I like it. And something I was thinking about while you were saying that, because again, very passionate about Loki returning to where he's supposed to be, is if no one is ever pointing out the right way, and I have air quotes here, the right way time is supposed to go, if nobody's sorting that, Loki dying in Infinity War doesn't matter. Because at this point, everything's a mess.
There is no more sense of a sacred timeline. And if this is taking place, I know we said potentially before MOM, but just hear me out on a different alternative theory here. If this is taking place, say, where we are in the MCU now, right? What was the property before this? Secret Invasion. We don't know where that actually was, so that's a bad example. But let's just say, for argument's sake, that we're just moving linearly and everything that we've seen since the end or since phase 4 started has been in release order. That's how it's happening. Obviously, we know that's not true, but for the sake of my hypothesis, we're going to take that. Now, if that's the case, and this takes place after Secret Invasion, there is no more sense of sacred timeline. There are instead existing universes. So that means because it wasn't written anymore, we're past where it was written, and He Who Remains said that in season 1 that he could no longer see the future. That means it's probably past where he had made the decision. Loki and Sylvie had that conversation we drew back too many times. We're deciding now. And that was in relation to Victor Timely, not so much picking the timelines, but I think it still kind of holds and can be used in both ways. Now, anything goes, to your point. There's no one deciding this is right, this is wrong. It doesn't even need to be a branch anymore. This is now just our characters through their actions, through free will, which is something that they've talked a lot about in this season, through that free will, building the sacred timeline as they make choices. Nothing is preordained anymore. Nothing is right. Nothing is wrong.
Exactly.
And we don't know exactly where that moment starts. But if we say, this is it, this is the start of that, and we don't know how that parallels to the MCU wider that we've seen thus far, Loki can just stroll on up, won't change a thing, and Thor is going to be PO'd that he thinks his brother forged his death again, but it was real this time.
Exactly. I am 100% on that page. And so I think for me, there's only one more thing I have to say. And it's mainly because I just want to point out that we were right about something, which was Renslayer being with Kang at the beginning. Only thing I want to point out that we were incorrect about, but is vital information to keep a hold of, is the TVA helped fight the multiversal war, which is not something we talked about at all. We thought that came after. The TVA was there before the multiversal war. And there's been a lot of conversation about before the war, whatever. I'm getting curious. I don't know about you.
Definitely. And I think the other thing to point out that I think is an interesting nuance that we were wrong about, he never actually led the TVA openly. He had them build it in his image. And then as soon as she went and said, let's go lead, he wiped them all. They never actually spent much time, if any, other than when they were building it, actually doing his work under He Who Remains.
Yeah.
He never went there. He never led them openly. As soon as it was built, they were wiped, and it was all the image of the timekeepers. That was one thing we were a little wrong about.
Well, as soon as the war was over, too. That was the primary.
Yeah, as soon as they go from war mode to maintenance mode, that's when he made that switch. We were always wondering, why did he change? What was that switch?
Well, but that makes sense because he needed them to be loyal to someone. And I feel like the timekeepers are a great ruse, but in this sense, I'm sure that they all knew him. That's why they all had to be wiped. They all knew him. They all had fought the war. They were following that specific variant. He needed to wipe them. That was just the end of it. He needed to wipe them because he no longer needed them to blindly follow that. He could have them follow the timekeepers. They'd believe in that. Awesome. He could do exactly what Miss Minute said, sit on his throne at the end of time while everybody else did his dirty work.
Exactly.
Which is interesting because he had the whole man behind the curtain ruse, but at the end of the day, the TVA was really the man behind the curtain, if you think about it.
I'm not really following.
Well, think about, I don't know, I guess a great example would be, the British royal family. Even back in the day, well, not way back in the day, but as they were kind of losing power, They look great. The monarchy, everybody's like, "Oh my god, we love them," or at least like, "We love the family." They don't necessarily love the monarchy. I'm not going to speak for all British people, but
Let's just say in the US, we think they're fascinating.
yeah. But we don't have a monarchy, so I'm sure we'd feel very differently if we did. We fought to not have one. So I think if you think from that perspective, they're not making decisions. They don't make a single decision that impacts the day to day life of the English people. They have a whole government for that. That is essentially what this was that, whoa, they look amazing. But at the end of the day, they aren't making the choices. You see them on TV, you watch their weddings, you see whatever. But I don't know. I don't sit there and know everything that's happening. And obviously, I'm also not English. I'm not out here keeping up with their day-to-day government updates, but it's not the same. They're not making those choices. You know what I mean? All the hard work for the country is being done by a different governing body. And that is essentially what was happening here was the TVA thought they were serving a higher being, but in reality, this higher being who was supposed to be making all these great choices, aka the timekeepers who were the ones physically undoing the timelines, no, the TVA was literally the ones doing all the work to make sure there wasn't any chaos happening.
Well, right, but I think the one thing you're missing there is that Kang was actually deciding sacred, not sacred, sacred, not sacred.
Was he still though? Because what was the loom doing?
Well, it doesn't the loom has to be programmed by someone.
Right. But was Miss Minutes just doing it?
I emotionally cannot go there. I don't even know.
I'm just saying it was kind of interesting because the man behind the curtain was really not the man behind the curtain because the original people are sitting here doing all the work to it.
I mean, I agree. I think you make a very valid point. And I just realized we did not talk about the time loop, and I do want to address that.
Ugh.
I know.
I hated that. That shouldn't have been possible in the TVA, but neither should time slipping shouldn't have been either.
I 100% agree. I 100% agree. That was my first thought was how is he existing in two places at once within the TVA itself? How is there because when he showed up in the old clothes, I was like, "Wait a minute."
Oh, I immediately was like, I've seen this already.
And well, yeah.
As soon as Sylvie got in that elevator, I knew what was happening.
Yes, yeah, and I was waiting for it.
Yeah.
Then it switches to Loki and you realize it's not the Loki that you just saw because he's dressed differently and you were like, "Wait, this is bloody Loki who just came back from the void and from the Citadel." And you're like, "Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute." And it's very confusing and I don't really know how it happened, but we need to I mean, I don't even know. I don't even know what to say about it because I don't it's clearly significant, right? And it has to be important understanding exactly how and why that happened because otherwise like what was the point of showing us the loop? What was the point of keeping that a mystery that Loki pruned himself? And is it showing that all time is circular?
Well, this goes back to time slipping, though. There's a reason we're seeing things that aren't supposed to be possible in the TVA. And to me, that reads that maybe the TVA is no longer sitting outside of time. Think about it. There are all these universes popping out around them. They're watching it happen. Maybe it's no longer outside of time. Maybe it's entering its own timeline.
Yeah, I think it has to be.
Well, I can't see how else it's possible. Whatever was keeping the TVA separate, maybe it was He Who Remains. And he was what was making sure the TVA remained out of time. And maybe this ties all the way back and starts to explain why we're getting all these references to time and how much time is passing in the TVA. Because if it becomes a timeline, well, time starts passing relatively normally.
And I want to bring something up that has to do with the time slipping and the circular time right now because I think it's important to point out that that was the first time we ever saw the butterfly effect in effect in the MCU because we were explicitly told no butterfly effect and then we were told by the Ancient One no, it branches off. But now that there is no sacred timeline, now that there is okay, this is a little before the whole explosion, I get that. But now that we have a multiverse, what if we're able to actually have a butterfly effect because it's no longer branching, it's just actually changing? Because nothing is written anymore, potentially. Now what you do in the past actually affects the future versus creating another branch.
Well, right, because it is a butterfly. Think about it this way. Loki, beginning of season 1, takes the Tesseract. They get him from the TVA, take him over there, bye-bye. They blow the branch. Or it wasn't even a full branch yet, but you know what I'm meaning. Well, if they hadn't interfered, which is what the TVA is trying not to do, they're trying not to interfere, everybody makes their own choices, then a whole new universe would be based off of Loki taking the Tesseract. That is the butterfly effect. You made one change that caused a whole other new chain of events to take place. So the butterfly effect has to be able to happen, or physically the multiverse and the idea of branches does not make sense.
Well, right. I'm saying, though, it's actually affecting one timeline. Like, you're not creating a new timeline by making a change, you're affecting your own timeline. Do you know what I'm saying? So instead of, okay, Loki makes that decision and now we're on a new timeline, because there is a multiverse now and because we are no longer in a written right wrong idea of time, he is now actually able to affect the future events of the sacred timeline.
Or is it just because the TVA is weird and he was time slipping? Does it all just come back to the fact that the time slipping screwed with the events that were supposed to happen?
That's also possible.
But at the end of the day, it created its own new narrative of what's supposed to happen, which means that one Loki needs to prune another Loki to keep everything moving in the same way.
That's also very possible. I don't know. I don't understand. I think there's so many concepts that have been introduced to an already very complicated understanding of time.
I need a book. I need a child book that has illustrations, has definitions that are written like Dr. Seuss, because quite frankly, I don't understand a lot of this.
I just need the multiverse for dummies.
That works too, but I would like a good little children's book that just explains it like I'm 5.
Yeah. I think this episode and this season has opened a lot of questions.
I can't wait for episode 6, mainly because I can't wait to see where it leaves us and what we have, like the ramifications and a lot of the stuff we have to talk about post that.
Yeah. I think we're done with episode 4, but I do want to say we have some exciting episodes coming up. I know Katie is going to dive into it for us as well, but episode 5, our reactions to episode 5, I'm so excited to watch it. I'm so excited to discuss with you, Kate, hear everything, and really drill into it because we're going to find out where everybody ends up. And then episode 6, to your point, we're probably going to break it up into multiple episodes because there's going to be a lot of ramifications. Heck, we might be visiting the sacred timeline in episodes 5 and 6. Who knows? So, with that all being said, make sure that you are subscribing on your podcast platform of choice because we are in for at least 4 to 6 really, really good episodes in the next few weeks. So, stick with us. Check out the website for updates. Check out the website for blog posts and all sorts of good stuff there. And also, if you want to help support the show, we would appreciate that. You can find all that info on our homepage.
And we have all of this coming up, so make sure you guys are keeping up with us. You can follow us on Instagram and Threads at Sisters Assembled and Twitter at Sis Assembled Pod. And you can keep up with us there. Make sure you're doing it because chaos is happening and Loki is insane and it's awesome. And the Marvels could also be insane. So just give us a follow. And coming up next, we actually technically, our next episode takes a small break from Loki, even though Loki episode 5 will come out on time as usual. But our next episode actually is going to be our Marvel's predictions episode, which will be coming out next. And then right after that, don't worry, guys, Loki episode 5 will be there too. So get ready. We're excited. We're really pumped. And keep up with everything Marvel's throwing at you right now because Marvel just blew your mind. So let's talk about it.